Anyone feel a draft? Or is it just me? You see, I'm wearing my spooky King Boo shirt. Cause it's spooky season. Ooh. Salutations, my friends, I'm the Mighty Mander, and today we're gonna move on from Max Payne to Remedy's next project, which after finishing up Max Payne, they would partner with Microsoft to develop an open world concept that was in pre-production for a very long time, which eventually they would ditch the open world concept and chop it up into a more linear experience, which we would now know as Alan Wake. So Alan Wake is not Max Payne, like not at all. It's very, very different in a lot of ways, but it also has a direct lineage to it in some other key ways, which we'll get into that later. So Alan Wake takes place in the fictional Pacific Northwest town of Bright Falls, Washington, which is, other than being on the other coast, it is ripped straight out of a Stephen King mystery novel. The titular writer Alan takes a vacation to Bright Falls with his wife Alice to try and shake off Alan's writer's block, and they end up embroiled in a supernatural disaster that ends up enveloping the whole town. So you guys may remember at the end of the Max Payne video, I expressed some concern that going forward, Remedy may shift their focus from gameplay and more to like narrative development, and like I was a bit worried that the games wouldn't be as fun as Max Payne going forward. And with Alan Wake, that is kind of exactly what happened. And even though that was kind of a fear of mine going in, I am glad that in hindsight, they made the decision to focus more on developing their storytelling chops rather than just developing another action game. The story and world building are very good. The characters are good, the mystery and suspense elements at the center of it are super interesting and compelling. The way the story is paced and the way it's delivered to you through these manuscript pages and through flashbacks, it's all really good stuff. The actual gameplay is a lot rougher. It's definitely not as tightly crafted as Max Payne, and it actually kind of gets in the way in some spots. It feels like it's kind of obligated to be a shooter rather than embracing what it really wants to be, which is a horror game. It certainly has the perfect setting for a horror story in the form of Bright Falls. Even without the supernatural elements, it's just got that creepy small town vibe. But it is also undeniably charming due to all the characters that populate it. It really nails the whole small town ensemble trope with the radio host that you meet at the beginning of the game and can be heard on different radios throughout the course of the rest of the game. Rose, the waitress from the Oh Dear Diner, who's like Alan's #1 super fan. The old gods of Asgard, the aging rock stars that you also meet in the diner. Sheriff Sarah Breaker, who's like really competent and helpful when you team up with her in later chapters. And of course, the incomparable Barry Wheeler, who's Alan's manager and agent and comes in to help once the incident kind of pops off. Speaking of, let's talk about Alan and Alice real quick. I am not sure how I feel about Alan. I like him, but I think I like him for the wrong reasons. I think I like him because he's kind of a fuck up and a little bit of a hack. I like that his series of novels that he wrote in-game is basically just Max Payne. I like Matthew Peretta's voice and his performance, particularly his narration with the manuscript pages and the contrast to when he really gets to go off the rails as crazy Alan later in the game. And it is very funny that at face value, it just seems like Alan is a man with a head injury, just fumbling his way through a comedy of errors and causing all sorts of chaos, evading police custody and destroying an entire town. Even though that's not actually what's going on. That's kind of what it seems like, and that's pretty funny. Otherwise though, Alan kind of seems like a bit of an asshole. I know this is contextual due to kind of what he's going through at the start of the game, but he is pretty snippy and rude to people in Bright Falls, particularly when they recognize him and want to talk to him about his writing.
Why, hello, Rose. What's on your mind?
I know who that famous artist was. It was Alan Wake, wasn't it? He's my favorite writer.
And his relationship with Alice is, complicated? It mostly seems fine, but the way he reacts whenever she talks about his writer's block is a little sus. And then when he discovers that she had set up the typewriter for him in the upstairs room in the cabin for their vacation as a way to try and, you know, give him a change of scenery, give him some inspiration so he could shake off his writer's block, that's a very sweet thing. And he reacts so negatively and so harshly, and he storms out of the cabin, and he specifically narrates in his thoughts after he storms out of the cabin that he left and went into the dark because he knew that Alice wouldn't follow him. And to give context for that, Alice has a fear of the dark, like a legit phobia that like really affects her. You can see it in several flashbacks, and it's set up right at the beginning of the game that she has a legit phobia of the dark. And to knowingly leave with the knowledge and like the predisposition that she won't follow you, notwithstanding that is the moment where the lights go out in the cabin and Alice actually gets taken by the darkness. It even seems it's just a little slimy, it's just a little shitty. I'm like, ugh. I don't know. You can definitely tell that he wants to make up for this move throughout the rest of the game by really going through hell to try and save Alice from whatever it is that's going on. But it just struck me as a particularly sinister moment for the character. I do really like the setting. Like, I really like Bright Falls, and I like that there's like this mystery kind of buried in the town. Like, there's some really, really great creepy moments early on. There's just a couple things that happened that made me just go like, what the fuck was happening here? Oh, okay, I'm in. I have to know what's going on. Like, it doesn't really tell you exactly what's going on. Even by the end of the game, you don't know exactly what's happening, but you do start to understand the rules. That, I think, is a good element to a good mystery, is that there has to be rules as to how the characters can interact with these mystery elements. And what it seems to be is that this darkness, this force of darkness that you're dealing with throughout the course of the game can affect the real world through people, and particularly people like Alan who have creative minds. There's this time in between the inciting incident of the game and when you first start going through the first chapter that Alan kind of has like amnesia, and the darkness had been using him to basically write a manuscript that is now coming to life and wreaking havoc throughout the course of the town. And so that's where all these manuscript pages come from, is like written by Alan during his like weird fugue state as a way for the darkness to use his brain to cause chaos. At least that's what I think is going on, just based on playing the game and not really looking into too much detail on the internet about it. And it's cool as hell, man. The plot is wild as shit in this game, but it all kind of makes sense within its own context, and it is probably the best part of the game. Well, the best part of the game other than Barry motherfucking Wheeler. Barry is Alan's slightly sleazy but ever dependable agent/manager, brought to life by a brilliant performance by Fred Berman, who is also a Max Payne alum who played Vinny Gognitti in those games. He's definitely got like cheapo talent agent vibes, like dead on, but he's hilarious and he's incredibly helpful. Barry was like my rock throughout the course of this game. He was the character that always tethered me to reality. Like, if I could see Barry, if Barry was there, I knew whatever environment I was in was real. I knew if Barry could see it, it was real. He always had my back. Barry ends up in this incredible fit that is like just completed by the headlamp, the Christmas lights, the flare gun, the flashlight, and then on top of the red puffy coat. What a fit, man. What an iconic look. That shit is awesome. I will definitely be wearing that costume at some point for Halloween sometime. Barry is one of my favorite Remedy characters that I've encountered so far, easily.
What are the Christmas lights for?
Protection, man! Like garlic against vampires?
Now, I don't want to harsh the vibes too much or nothing, because I did really like this game, but I did not enjoy playing this game that much. The chief complaint I really have is that the gameplay feels unrefined compared to Max Payne. Max Payne was so tight. In this game, there's a lot of moments of friction that, honestly, the gameplay feels like it really gets in the way sometimes. I think one of the main problems I have is with the game's dodge mechanic. It just feels very loose and imprecise, and it's also tied to the sprint, so you can't do one without the other. Like, you can't sprint without doing that, like, tumble dodge beforehand if you're in a combat encounter. And I think just giving it its own dedicated button might have solved a lot of those issues, but I think it even goes a little bit further than that. This still feels like it's trying to be an action game, and the central mechanic of breaking armor off of enemies with the flashlight just feels like agonizingly slow in a game that's supposed to be paced like an action game. Like, that kind of mechanic creates tension because you have to dedicate a certain amount of time to each enemy to break their armor. But that is a mechanic that feels like it would be much more at home in a straight up horror game. A frequent problem that I had is that enemies would just rush me and beat the shit out of me. Like, There really didn't feel like there was a ton that I could do. There are tons of moments where a group of enemies would just completely demolish me. And there's very few up close options in this game other than like very limited resources like flares or like, you know, just point blanking them with a flashlight. The only variations on these enemies that just walk towards you and try and smack you are enemies that teleport around, which are annoying. Much bigger enemies, which are the same as regular enemies with just bigger weapons and they take more flashlight and bullets to take down. Enemies that throw shit at you from a distance, which it is admittedly very, very funny when a wrench or a hammer just flies in from off screen and just bonks Alan on the head really hard. That's really funny, but it's also really annoying. And there's these poltergeist objects that will like shake very violently and then fly towards you, which it's just the same as a group of enemies beating the crap out of you, man. Like having a dumpster and then a mailbox and then a car fly towards you and hit you 1, 2, 3, and then you're dead. Like, it's just the same shit as a bunch of enemies running towards you. It's just annoying in a different flavor. Using more powerful tools like the hunting rifle or the heavy-duty lantern as opposed to just, you know, a regular flashlight, or having insta-kill tools like the flare gun or the flashbangs, those things can feel really good. Like, you can get into a little bit of a flow where you're like, okay, there's a certain amount of enemies advancing on me. I'm gonna whittle down this big dude's armor. Bam, bam, hit him with the hunting rifle, then hop over here, shoot a flare at this other big guy. That's gonna knock him out. It's also gonna break the armor of the enemy next to him so I can pop, pop, pop with the revolver. Like, there is definitely a flow here. Like, this is still Remedy we're talking about. They know how to make a game. But you're constantly getting all these tools taken away from you at chapter breaks, which makes the game feel like it really doesn't have much of a sense of progression. Like, if this game were to make a slightly bigger deal out of moments like when you find a new weapon, like the hunting rifle, or you upgrade from the break action shotgun to the pump action shotgun, or the first moment when you get introduced to the flare gun or flashbangs, or upgrading from a regular flashlight to a heavy duty flashlight or a lantern, I think that would add such a satisfying sense of progression to a gameplay loop that right now feels very scattershot and kind of all over the place. Like I mentioned before, it sort of feels like it has to be a shooter rather than wanting to be a full-blown shooter. Like, we want to tell this mystery story, but we have to have the player engage with a central mechanic of some kind, so I guess let's just have it be shooting, because that's what we've done before. I think that could work if they leaned more into the horror vibes, slowed down the pace, and made it a full, proper, like, Resident Evil remake-style horror game, which is what I'm really hoping that they did with Alan Wake 2 once I get there. The DLC, which is included in the remaster, I think it's the best part of the game. It feels like they were finally able to break from the open world design that they originally started with and fully just get creative, rearrange assets into some real wild shit. These chapters don't have predetermined locations like the main game. They are fully taking place in a surreal world with wild and crazy places everywhere, and it's awesome. It's really, really cool. And finally, I want to talk about this game specifically as Remedy's successor to Max Payne. We've already established that the gameplay is not something I enjoyed as much as Max Payne. We don't have to harp on that. Whatever, it is what it is. But the storytelling in Alan Wake is leaps and bounds ahead of anything in either of the Max Payne games. And that is what I really come away from this game feeling. And there are a lot of other hallmarks of Remedy's game design style all over the place in this game, like extremely detailed environments, tons of interactable objects with very intricate animations, maybe not quite as many objects that you can just, you know, go around and poke, but the environmental design in this game is incredibly strong, even stronger than it was in Max Payne, for sure. Meta text within the story that reinforces its themes, like in Max Payne you had lords and ladies and address unknown and stuff like that. In Alan Wake you have the Twilight Zone-esque Night Springs. The Night Springs shorts are really cool and well-written and well-directed little shorts that are all filmed in live action, which, you know, Remedy loves to use that stuff in all their modern games, so it's really cool to see them kind of slowly evolving that practice in examples like this. Also, this is definitely still a wife game, although it is less of an I'm angry because my wife is dead game and more of a where the hell is my wife game, which I guess is an improvement? I'm not exactly sure, but one thing I do know is that Alice is definitely a better character and contributes more to the story than Max Payne's family ever did. The most interesting link to Max Payne, though, is definitely in Alan Wake's novels. Basically, his Alex Casey crime novels are just straight up Max Payne novels. Like, the cover designs are very Max Payne with the black and the white and the red. You can find a couple pages of it, and they're narrated by James McCaffrey, the voice of Max Payne. They're written like Max Payne comic panels.
I can see them now. My wife and my baby. Honey, I'm home.
Like, they're clearly representing Max Payne. And that's very interesting within the context of this story because Alan is very much trying to distance himself from his past writing these Alex Casey novels. Like, that's the source of his writer's block, is because he's trying to write something else and he can't. Now, I'm not gonna pretend like I know for sure that this is how the people who worked on Alan Wake that previously worked on Max Payne felt when they were making this game, but one has to assume that there must be some feelings there, at least like they're expressing a desire to move on and fully commit to a new project. And it's a really interesting representation of that. Like, that's some real juicy subtext, man. There's a lot going on there. Also, just before filming this video, I finally remembered that I'm like, oh yeah, there was like a weird follow-up to Alan Wake in the form of Alan Wake's American Nightmare, which is this like weird Xbox Live Arcade kind of much smaller scope game that is like a direct follow-up to Alan Wake. And if this is what the main game looked like originally, I am very glad there was a remaster, because it is definitely rough around the edges, more so than the remaster of the original game. This definitely strikes me as a budget-constrained project. Like, hey, we're not working with a lot here. Let's leave it all out on the table because we're not sure if we're ever gonna get another chance to finish up this story. That's the vibe I get from what ended up on the screen with Alan Wake's American Nightmare. And it is a very clever use of very limited resources. Like, they didn't have the budget to create a lot of environments, so they found clever ways to use them multiple times. And as a story follow-up, I think it's pretty good. Like, I think there is some good characterization for Alan. I think introducing Mr. Scratch as like the full antagonistic force within the dark place is really compelling. It just gives Matthew Peretta and what's the guy's name? What's the guy who's Alan Wake's face actor? Il Cavilli? I don't know, man, he's fucking Finnish. Just absolutely hamming it up as Mr. Scratch. That stuff is great. It's so weird and out there, and it's just like they were having a lot of fun making this stuff, you can tell. It's also really cool that it's set within like this manifestation of Night Springs, like the town from the TV show. Like, it's like a desert town, and it's like just got real creepy vibes, and I like it. It's neat. It's a neat little setting for like this little offshoot. Overall, this strikes me as the Alan Wake 2 that we get in the universe where Alan Wake 2 is never allowed to exist, which is really cool that we eventually got both. Like, there are some cool details in here that I now know because they got famous in Alan Wake 2. Like, the whole idea of Herald of Darkness versus Champion of Light, that is the plot of American Nightmare.
Hot on the heels of the Herald of Darkness, the Champion of Light forges on to see the stars.
Like, cool. I love that. I don't know. Gameplay-wise, American Nightmare focuses a lot more on action, which is just straight up not what I want from this game. The shooting is better because the guns are more capable. Like, Alan Wake with an AA-12 is objectively hilarious. But if you're gonna make a creepy game set in a Twilight Zone-ass desert town full of shadow monsters everywhere, that feels like a game that should be a horror game and not a crazy action shooter. That's just me. And again, I really hope they fully commit to the horror vibes for Alan Wake 2. That's what I'm super hopeful about at this point. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with Alan Wake. I kind of had no expectations going in because I had never really seen gameplay before, and while I didn't particularly enjoy the gameplay itself, I really loved the story and like the narrative direction of this game, and I cannot wait to see where those storytelling chops go from here. So I hope you'll join me as I move on to Remedy's next project, as they continue to partner with Microsoft to create a little game known as Quantum Break. So until next time, I love you all. Take care of yourselves. Peace out, my friends. Oh shit, they made a whole ass TV show with Quantum Break too, didn't they?